We live in a world obsessed with polish, with flawless images, rehearsed smiles, and perfect timing. But what if perfection is the very thing stealing your peace? What if your pursuit of the ideal is pulling you away from the only thing that's truly real? This moment, right now. We've been conditioned to think we'll finally be happy once everything is in place, once we have the perfect career, the perfect body, the perfect routine. But here's the trap. Perfection is a mirage. The closer you get, the farther it moves. And while you chase it, life quietly slips by in the background, uncelebrated, unnoticed, unlived. The Stoics never told us to be perfect. They urged us to be present, because presence is the only place where change happens, where clarity exists, where peace lives. Marcus Aurelius didn't write meditations to impress the world. He wrote to remind himself of what matters now. Epictetus didn't ask us to control outcomes. He asked us to control attention. And Seneca didn't say, polish your image. He said, polish your soul. So today we strip away the noise. We abandon the illusion of flawless, and we return to something more powerful: presence. Because that's where life is waiting for you, not in a perfect version of yourself, but in the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are, right here, right now. Strive for presence, not perfection. There's a quiet kind of suffering that hides behind the pursuit of perfection. It looks like ambition. It looks like discipline. Sometimes it even looks like success. But underneath it all, it's often fear. Fear of being seen as flawed. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of not being enough. And that fear keeps you trapped in a cycle of constant self-correction, constant control. You're no longer living. You're performing. Every action becomes a calculation. Every word is filtered. Every moment is edited before it's even fully experienced. The Stoics knew the danger in this. Perfection is not a virtue. Presence is. Because presence means you're actually here. Not lost in regrets about yesterday or projections about tomorrow, but rooted in the only thing that's real. This moment. And the truth is, no matter how hard you try, no amount of polishing will ever make life flawless. You will still fall short sometimes. You will still say the wrong thing, forget important details, feel overwhelmed, lose your cool, doubt yourself. And all of that is okay, because the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be awake. When you're present, you meet life on its terms. You hear what's actually being said, not just what you expect. You feel the discomfort before it turns into resentment. You notice the beauty in something simple, a conversation, a breath, a moment of silence. You stop chasing the next version of yourself and start building a relationship with who you are now. And that relationship is everything. Because if you can't sit with your current self, with all your rough edges and unfinished chapters, then no future version of you will ever feel like home. But presence requires courage. It's much easier to distract yourself with the pursuit of a better version of you than it is to face the reality of who you are now. That's why so many people live half-lives. They're always on the way to something better, always trying to become someone more. But the Stoic doesn't wait. The Stoic doesn't say, I'll live fully once I fix everything. He says, I live fully now, while I fix what I can. He honors the process and the present. And, ironically, when you stop trying to be perfect, you become more powerful. People trust you more. They feel safe around you. Because your presence tells them they can drop their mask too, that they don't need to perform either. Your presence becomes permission, and that is more valuable than any illusion of flawlessness. So here's the shift. Stop trying to impress people with your polish. Instead, move them with your presence. Let them feel your attention. Let them experience your authenticity. Be the one who is actually there, not just physically but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, because real presence doesn't come from having everything in place. It comes from letting go of the need to control it all. When you start striving for presence instead of perfection, your relationships change, your work changes, your inner dialogue softens. You stop nitpicking yourself for every misstep. You begin to forgive yourself more quickly, recover more gracefully, and love more fully. You trade tension for trust, judgment for compassion, and in that exchange, life becomes lighter, not because it's easier, but because you're no longer resisting it. So ask yourself honestly, what would shift in your life if you stopped trying to be perfect and just committed to being here, to actually feeling what you feel, saying what you mean, doing what matters, even if it's messy, even if it's uncertain? That's the path the Stoics walked. Not flawless, but fully alive. And you can too. Presence doesn't demand that you're extraordinary. It only asks that you're real. Perfection is paralysis in disguise. At first, perfection sounds noble. It wears the mask of ambition. It disguises itself as high standards, attention to detail, commitment to excellence. But beneath that polished surface, perfection often hides something more dangerous: fear. Not fear of failure itself, but fear of being seen failing, fear of being vulnerable, fear of letting the world witness our incomplete, imperfect selves. And that fear, left unchecked, doesn't push us forward. It freezes us in place. This is the great illusion of perfectionism. It pretends to be a fuel, but it often functions as a brake. You overthink your next move. You delay starting because the plan isn't perfect yet. You revise and revise again, and somewhere along the way, momentum dies. Paralysis sets in. You become more focused on protecting your image than on making progress. And progress, unlike perfection, is messy by nature. The Stoics were never interested in ideal appearances. They were interested in right action, in movement, in forward motion, even if it's clumsy, because clumsy action still builds wisdom, while hesitation, that long pause disguised as preparation, only multiplies regret. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And perfectionism is one of the biggest wastes of time we allow. How many moments have you delayed because the conditions weren't ideal? How many ideas have you buried because they weren't fully formed yet? How many conversations have you postponed, projects you've shelved, goals you've abandoned, simply because you weren't sure they'd turn out exactly as planned? The Stoic doesn't worship certainty. He doesn't wait for the perfect wave to start swimming. He steps into life as it is, unpolished, unpredictable, and adapts along the way. Because he knows that waiting for the flawless path often means never walking at all. Perfection becomes a trap, a prison made of invisible bars, and the longer you stay there, the more the world passes you by. There's also something quietly harmful about the way perfectionism shapes your identity. You start defining your worth by outcomes. You tie your value to performance. You become afraid of trying new things, not because you lack interest, but because you can't guarantee success. And slowly, the need to get it right kills your curiosity, your creativity, your freedom to explore. Perfection doesn't just paralyze action, it suffocates the soul. But here's the truth. You don't need to be flawless to be powerful. You don't need to execute everything with precision to make an impact. What you need is honesty, intention, courage, and above all, movement. Action that is real, even if imperfect, is always better than perfection that never leaves the page. No one was ever changed by the thing you almost said, or the dream you almost pursued, or the version of yourself you almost became. Perfectionism will convince you to keep polishing, keep waiting, keep doubting, but the Stoic understands this for what it is, a delay tactic, a mask, and he removes it, not because he doesn't care about quality, but because he values momentum more. He chooses progress over performance, growth over image, movement over mastery. So if you feel stuck, ask yourself, am I really not ready, or am I just afraid it won't be perfect? And what if it didn't have to be? What if good enough to begin is more powerful than perfect enough to delay? Your life doesn't need to be spotless. It needs to be lived. Let perfection reveal itself for what it often is. Not a standard to aspire to, but a cage to escape. Progress is better than flawlessness. In a world that celebrates the finished product, we often forget the beauty of becoming. We scroll through highlight reels, compare ourselves to people who are 10 steps ahead, and wonder why we don't feel like we're enough. But progress, real, honest progress, is rarely loud. It's not always pretty, and it certainly isn't perfect. It's invisible most days. It happens in silence, in struggle, in small decisions no one sees. And yet, it's those imperfect, consistent steps that build something far greater than flawless moments ever could. The Stoics didn't teach us to reach a finish line. They taught us to walk the path with intention. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about arriving. He wrote about improving. Every page of Meditations is a humble record of someone trying to live better, think clearer, and be more aligned with their values. He failed often, and he admitted it. But what mattered wasn't his failure. It was his return, his willingness to keep going. That's the Stoic ideal. Not perfection, but persistence. When we chase flawlessness, we rob ourselves of growth. We become afraid to start anything we might not master right away. We fear judgment more than we crave transformation. But progress is not about getting everything right. It's about getting closer, closer to who you want to be, closer to your values, closer to the kind of discipline and presence that create a meaningful life, even if the path is uneven, even if you trip along the way. Progress, unlike perfection, accepts your humanity. It allows space for mistakes. It invites you to learn from them. That's where the real magic lies, not in pretending you've got it all figured out, but in being willing to figure it out as you go. And that's where freedom is born. Because when you no longer need to be flawless to take action, you unlock a power most people never access, the power to begin again, to recalibrate, to improve. Ask yourself, who do you respect more, the person who hides behind an image of having it all together, or the one who's open about their journey and still keeps moving forward? Who inspires you? The one who pretends they never fall, or the one who stumbles, gets back up, and continues with courage? We already know the answer. Progress connects us. Perfection separates us. Progress humbles us. Perfection inflates the ego. The Stoics would remind us that the goal of life isn't to look impressive, it's to become wise. And wisdom is built through trial, through correction, through repeated effort, not effortless talent. If you wait to be perfect, you'll never start. If you expect yourself to be flawless, you'll never feel worthy. But if you commit to improving, slowly, quietly, patiently, then nothing can stop you, because you're playing the long game. You're choosing substance over surface. Let others chase applause. Let others perfect their presentation. You just keep moving forward. Read one more page. Take one more breath. Make one more decision in alignment with your values. That's how character is built. That's how a life of integrity is shaped. Not through moments of brilliance, but through the quiet, imperfect consistency of someone who's willing to grow. So today, drop the pressure to be flawless and pick up something stronger, the discipline of progress, the humility to learn, the courage to show up, especially when it's hard, because that's what changes you. That's what builds a stoic soul. Embrace the moment fully. There is a kind of strength that doesn't look like power. It looks like presence. It's not loud. It doesn't need attention. But it transforms everything. Because to truly embrace a moment is to choose life over illusion. It's to stop running from what is and finally sit with it. Even if it's imperfect, even if it hurts, even if it doesn't look like what you imagined. And in that act, you reclaim your freedom. Because most people don't actually live their lives. They plan them, they anticipate them, they remember them, but very few experience them as they're happening. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus reminded us that there are two domains, what is in our control and what is not. And the moment, this single fleeting slice of now, is always in our control if we choose it. Not because we can shape it into perfection, but because we can meet it with attention. Most of the anxiety people feel doesn't come from the present moment. It comes from resisting it, from wanting it to be something else, from wishing we were somewhere else, someone else, living some other version of this life. But what happens when you stop resisting and simply allow yourself to be here? You start to see the beauty you've overlooked. You notice the light filtering through the window, the weight of your breath, the rhythm of your thoughts, the softness in your chest when you drop the armor for a second and let yourself feel. And suddenly, you're not lost in your mind. You're anchored in your life. There's power in giving the moment your full attention, not half your mind while you scroll, not fragments of thought while you plan what to say next, but your full, undivided presence, because the moment, any moment, holds something sacred. It might be trying to teach you something. It might be trying to wake you up. But if you're too busy editing the present through the lens of your expectations, you'll miss the gift that's already in your hands. We often chase peak experiences, milestones, achievements, moments we can frame and look back on. But the most meaningful parts of life rarely announce themselves. They slip in quietly. A conversation you didn't expect. A decision that felt small but changed everything. A laugh, a tear, a silence that held more truth than any speech. You don't need a perfect setting to have a powerful experience. You only need your attention. Embracing the moment doesn't mean pretending it's all beautiful. Some moments are painful, some are boring, some are chaotic. But even then, especially then, presence is your way through. When you resist the now, you suffer twice. Once from the pain itself, and again from your refusal to meet it. But when you embrace it, something shifts. Even if you can't change it, you can face it, and that makes all the difference. So the next time you find your mind drifting to what went wrong, to what might happen, to what you should have said, gently bring it back. Ask yourself, what's here right now that I haven't noticed? What's happening beneath the noise? Because the moment is always offering you something, a lesson, a release, a reminder that you're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing how you respond. The Stoic doesn't need ideal conditions to be fully alive. He simply returns again and again to what is. He doesn't chase the extraordinary. He finds meaning in the ordinary. That's what presence really is. The radical act of saying, this is enough. This breath, this space, this truth. Embrace it fully, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Let go of the ideal and live the real. Somewhere deep in our minds, we all carry a picture, a version of how life should look. The perfect job, the ideal partner, the flawless routine, a vision of who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to have, and how everything is supposed to unfold. And while there's nothing wrong with dreaming, the danger lies in our attachment to that imagined version. Because the stronger our grip on the ideal, the harder it becomes to accept and embrace the real. The Stoics were not against vision, but they warned us not to confuse imagination with reality. They knew that when we cling too tightly to how things should be, we become blind to how they actually are, and that blindness, that resistance, becomes suffering. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." And that craving isn't always material. Sometimes it's a craving for perfection, a flawless life that never existed to begin with. When you're obsessed with the ideal, nothing you have feels like enough. You don't appreciate the relationship because it doesn't match the fantasy. You don't enjoy the journey because it doesn't look like the highlight reel. You don't respect your own efforts because they don't meet the imagined standard you built in your head. And over time, the gap between real and ideal becomes a source of constant frustration. You feel behind, incomplete, disconnected. Not because your life is broken, but because your expectation is unrealistic. Living the real means letting go of that fantasy. It means looking at your life, your actual life, and asking, what's already working? What's already beautiful, even in its rawness? Who have I become, not in theory, but in practice? Because the truth is, the life you imagined might not be the one that fulfills you. The person you thought you should become might not be the one who brings you peace. And the version of success you've been chasing might be nothing more than a borrowed dream, something sold to you by someone else's definition of worth. Letting go of the ideal is not giving up. It's waking up. It's choosing to stop rejecting what's in front of you simply because it doesn't look like what you planned. It's realizing that the most meaningful parts of your life might be the ones that were never on the blueprint. The people you didn't expect, the challenges you never asked for, the growth you never saw coming. And here's what the Stoic understands better than most. Peace doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from making peace with what is. That doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you stop resisting. It means you no longer need your reality to fit your fantasy in order to be grateful. You can want more while still loving where you are. You can strive for growth while still honoring the path you've walked. You can change your life, but not because it's broken, because it's evolving. The ideal will always be tempting. It promises control. It whispers that happiness is just one more achievement away, but it's a trap. Because as long as you're chasing something that exists only in theory, you'll miss the beauty of what exists in front of you. The people who love you now, the body that carries you now, the progress you've made now. And that's not just a loss, it's a kind of self-abandonment. The Stoic chooses presence over perfection and truth over illusion. He sees the ideal for what it is, a concept, and the real for what it is, a gift, one that can only be lived, never controlled. So loosen your grip, breathe into the moment, meet your life, not as it was supposed to be, but as it is. That's where freedom lives. That's where peace begins. Mindfulness is your anchor. In the storm of modern life, where notifications pull your attention every few seconds, where people demand instant responses, and your thoughts feel like 1,000 tabs left open in your mind, mindfulness becomes more than just a concept. It becomes your anchor, your way back, your reminder that beneath the noise there is a stillness you can return to. And in that stillness you find clarity, not because life suddenly makes sense, but because you stop trying to control everything and begin to observe. The Stoics might not have used the word mindfulness, but they lived it deeply. Epictetus said, "Be not swept off your feet by the vividness of the impression, but say, 'Wait for me a little, impression. Let me see what you are and what you represent.'" This is mindfulness, a pause between stimulus and reaction, a breath between experience and judgment, the ability to step back and see instead of always doing. It is what separates the impulsive from the wise, the distracted from the grounded. And here's why it matters so much. Most of your suffering doesn't come from what's happening around you. It comes from your interpretation, from the stories you tell yourself, from the assumptions you make, and the fears you feed. But when you're mindful, truly mindful, you catch yourself in the act. You begin to see the story forming before it consumes you. You notice the tension in your chest before it becomes anger. You hear the judgment forming in your mind before it slips out as criticism. Mindfulness gives you choice, and that choice is everything. It's easy to think of mindfulness as a ritual, something you do in the morning or at night. But the Stoic view invites you to something deeper, not a practice but a way of living, a state of attentiveness that follows you into every moment. When you eat, you taste. When you walk, you feel the ground. When you listen, you actually hear. You don't just go through the motions of life, you inhabit them. You stop looking for escape, and you start looking into what's here. And when things get difficult, as they inevitably will, mindfulness is what keeps you from being swept away. It's the calm in the chaos. It reminds you that feelings aren't facts, that urges aren't commands, and that every emotion, no matter how intense, will pass if you don't feed it. It's not about suppressing what you feel. It's about not reacting unconsciously to what you feel. That is Stoic strength. Not cold detachment, but thoughtful awareness. In a distracted world, mindfulness becomes a radical act. To sit with your thoughts instead of fleeing from them. To breathe instead of react. To witness your pain instead of numbing it. That's power. Because the person who can pause, who can observe their inner landscape, becomes unshakable. They may still hurt, they may still fall, but they do so with intention, with awareness, and with far less chaos. So how do you live this? You begin with one breath, one moment. You stop what you're doing and ask, where am I right now? What am I feeling? What am I choosing? And then you return, not to a version of yourself that's more perfect, but to the one that is fully awake, fully alive. The world doesn't need more perfection, it needs more presence. And mindfulness is how you offer it, not just to others, but to yourself. Because your peace won't be found in controlling every outcome. It will be found in your ability to return to yourself again and again, no matter what chaos surrounds you. The present moment is your foundation. Mindfulness is the anchor that keeps you from drifting. Be where your feet are. There's something powerful about that simple phrase. Be where your feet are. It sounds obvious, even too simple, but in a world that constantly pulls us into the past or pushes us toward the future, actually being where you are is becoming a lost art. Most people aren't where their feet are. Their bodies might be present, but their minds are trapped in mental loops, replaying old conversations, worrying about outcomes, trying to fix things that haven't even happened yet. And this disconnection, this subtle separation between body and mind, slowly eats away at our peace. The Stoics understood this well. They taught that now is all we ever truly have. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors, unless with a view to some mutual benefit." In other words, stop mentally leaving your life. Stop abandoning the moment for worries, for judgments, for distractions that pull you away from what actually exists. Because what exists, what is real, is what's right in front of you, where your feet are. But how often do we escape the moment? You're sitting at dinner, and instead of tasting your food or connecting with the person across from you, you're thinking about the work email you haven't answered. You're lying in bed, but your mind is 5 years in the future, trying to control outcomes you haven't even lived. You're having a conversation, but your attention is split between what's being said and what you're going to say next. And we wonder why we feel so scattered, so anxious, so disconnected, not just from others, but from ourselves. Being where your feet are is a commitment to return, to stop running, to stop performing in your head and just arrive, right here, with whatever is present, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's not what you wanted. Especially then. Because that's where your power is. Not in the fantasy, but in the real. You can't act from a place you're not. You can't change what you're not willing to face. And you can't find peace if you're always somewhere else. The Stoic path is not about detachment from life. It's about full engagement with it. And full engagement starts with presence, with standing in your reality, however it feels, and saying, "This is where I am. This is what I have. What can I do with it?" You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to feel fully in control. You just need to show up. Because when you do, you start to notice things you were missing. You realize the conversation you were half listening to is actually full of meaning. You realize the task you were rushing through contains a quiet rhythm that slows your breath. You realize that even pain, when truly felt, becomes a doorway to wisdom. And all of that begins with presence. Not theoretical presence, not spiritual jargon, just the grounded, simple act of being where your feet are. The truth is, life is not lived in your mind. It's lived in your body, in your breath, in your senses. And when you bring your awareness back to the place your body already occupies, you give yourself the opportunity to engage with life as it unfolds, not as you wish it would be, but as it is. That's not resignation. That's power. That's choice. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or disconnected, ask yourself, where are my feet? Not metaphorically, literally. Where am I? What's around me? What can I feel, hear, see, smell? That moment of grounding, of anchoring, pulls you out of illusion and back into life. Because the only place you can think clearly, love fully, act decisively, and grow meaningfully is right here, where your feet are. Accept imperfection with grace. There's a quiet kind of power in learning to accept imperfection, not with bitterness, not with frustration, but with grace. It's one thing to tolerate your flaws or the chaos of life. It's another to look directly at the mess, the cracks, the missteps, and soften, to say, yes, this is part of the story too. That's not weakness. That's strength of the rarest kind, the kind that doesn't rely on control, but on wisdom, the kind the Stoics spoke of, not with loud declarations, but with steady hearts. Imperfection is not the enemy. The belief that things must be perfect, that you must be perfect, is what creates tension, shame, and self-rejection. Every time you beat yourself up for not doing enough, every time you hold back because you're afraid of messing up, Every time you look at your life through the lens of not good enough yet, you cut yourself off from the one thing that makes growth possible: acceptance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." This applies to our view of ourselves as much as it does to the world. If you view imperfection as failure, you'll carry a constant sense of deficiency. But if you view it as part of the process, part of your nature, part of the human experience, you reclaim your peace. You stop trying to outsmart your flaws and start learning from them. To accept imperfection with grace is to stop fighting a battle you were never meant to win. You were never meant to be flawless. You were meant to be evolving, growing, repeating lessons until they finally sink in. Failing forward, not standing still. And that means making peace with the fact that your timing won't always be right. Your words won't always land. Your plans won't always unfold cleanly. But your effort, your courage, your willingness to show up, that's where your worth lives. Not in the perfection of your performance, but in the presence of your heart. Grace means you speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. It means you stop asking yourself to meet standards that no real human can meet. It means you release yourself from the prison of should have and enter the reality of what is. It's not about giving up. It's about giving yourself space to breathe, to be human, to fall and rise without punishment. Think about the people who have made the biggest difference in your life. Were they perfect, or were they kind, honest, vulnerable? Chances are their imperfection was part of what made them relatable, trustworthy, real. So why not extend that same grace to yourself? Why not recognize that your scars are not stains, they are stories, evidence that you've tried, failed, felt, lived, that you've been shaped by life, not untouched by it. And it's not just about how you treat yourself. Accepting imperfection with grace also transforms your relationships. You stop expecting others to meet your unspoken ideals. You become less reactive, more understanding. You stop demanding perfection from the people you love, and in doing so, you create room for deeper connection. You let them breathe too. The Stoic doesn't seek flawlessness. He seeks alignment, to live in integrity, to act with virtue, and to respond to life as it is, not as he wishes it to be. And that includes responding to himself with the same philosophy. Discipline, yes, but also compassion. Self-awareness, yes, but not self-punishment. He accepts what is imperfect, not because he lacks standards, but because he knows that harshness doesn't lead to excellence. It leads to shame. Grace, however, leads to growth. So today, practice grace. When you catch yourself falling into self-judgment, pause, breathe, remind yourself, this is not failure, this is feedback. This is life happening in real time, and you are allowed to be unfinished as long as you are willing, because the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be whole, and wholeness includes your flaws. Now is all you ever have. There is a strange illusion we all fall for at some point, the idea that life is something that happens later. That fulfillment is somewhere in the future, waiting for the perfect conditions. We plan for someday, postpone joy for a better time, and live as if there will always be more chances, more clarity, more time. But the Stoics saw through this illusion. They knew that the only thing you ever truly own is now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not even 5 minutes from now. Just this moment. And the way you live this moment, how you breathe, how you think, how you show up, is the only measure of whether you're truly alive. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You live as if you have 1,000 years to live. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." He wasn't trying to be morbid. He was trying to shake us awake. Because the truth is, postponing life is one of the most common and invisible forms of self-sabotage. We tell ourselves we'll be present once things calm down. We'll love fully once we've healed more. We'll take the risk once we're certain of the outcome. But that version of life, always deferred, always delayed, isn't really life at all. It's rehearsal. It's limbo. To the Stoic, this moment is sacred because it's real. It's the only place where action exists, where virtue can be expressed, where choices can be made. You cannot love in the past. You cannot grow in the future. You can only do those things now. And yet, how much of your mental energy is trapped in places you can no longer reach, or haven't even entered yet? The mind loves to drift. It tells stories, creates worries, projects outcomes. But the soul, the part of you that is wise, grounded, and true, lives only here, right now. In the inhale, you're ignoring. In the silence, you're avoiding. In the subtle signals of your body trying to pull you back to reality. That's not just poetic, that's biological. When you anchor yourself in the present, your nervous system shifts. You regulate. You stop spiraling. You return to what's essential. But presence is a choice. It doesn't just happen. You have to claim it. You have to say, "I will not abandon this moment for a fantasy. I will not trade what is real for what is imagined, because the future will always tempt you with a better version of life. The past will always haunt you with what could have been, and you, if you're not careful, will spend your entire existence chasing ghosts." What would change if you fully inhabited now? If you stopped waiting for the perfect time to start healing, loving, growing? If you realized that clarity doesn't come from thinking more, it comes from doing, from engaging, from being in the moment with your whole heart? The Stoic life isn't a life of waiting. It's a life of action, of responsibility, of courage. Not someday, today. So look around you. Feel your breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Ask yourself, am I really here? Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and if you're not, gently return. No shame, no story, just return. Because the present moment doesn't care where you've been. It only asks, what will you do with me now? There is no perfect day coming, no ideal version of you arriving with fanfare. There is only this day, this hour, this breath. And if you live it fully, if you pour your attention into it, you won't need more time. You'll just need this moment, lived well. Because the Stoic understands what most forget. Now is not a stepping stone to something better. Now is life itself. Joy hides in presence, not performance. We've been taught, almost unconsciously, that joy is something we have to earn, that it comes at the end of a long road of effort, discipline, and achievement, that it waits for us on the other side of success. Once we've proven ourselves, once we've fixed ourselves, once we've become worthy enough to deserve it. But this belief has a cost, because while we chase joy through performance, through outcomes and applause, we overlook the simple, quiet truth the Stoics knew all along. Joy doesn't live in what we achieve, it lives in what we notice. And the only place you can truly notice anything is here, in the present. When your mind is locked on performance, when you measure your worth by how much you've done, how well you're doing it, or who's watching, joy becomes fragile. It depends on validation. It rises and falls with metrics. It vanishes the moment the spotlight dims. But when your attention shifts from how you appear to where you are, something changes. You begin to experience moments directly, without needing to turn them into something impressive. You laugh more easily, you breathe more deeply, you stop editing your life and start participating in it. Seneca once said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." It's a radical idea that joy can be found in this very breath, in this cup of coffee, in this quiet conversation. Not because the moment is extraordinary, but because you are fully in it. The Stoic doesn't wait for joy. He creates the conditions in which it can arise: presence, gratitude, attention. He lets go of the false idea that he must always be achieving to be at peace. Think about the last time you truly felt joy, not just a fleeting thrill, but a deep, calm sense of, "This is enough." Chances are you weren't performing, you weren't chasing, you weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just there. Maybe it was a walk in the sun, a moment of stillness before the world woke up, a laugh shared with someone who really sees you. That's the kind of joy that doesn't need to be earned. It only needs to be noticed. But performance often gets in the way. We curate our lives for display, even in private. We measure our value by productivity. We pressure ourselves to turn every quiet moment into something visible, something measurable. But the most meaningful moments often go undocumented. They aren't posted or praised. They simply happen, and if you're not present, you miss them. Not because they weren't there, but because you weren't. The Stoic isn't against achievement. He values excellence, but he doesn't confuse it with joy. He knows that you can win and still feel empty if you weren't present along the way. He knows that a life spent impressing others often ends in exhaustion. But a life spent paying attention, truly being where you are, leads to something much richer than praise: peace. So what if, starting today, you measured your life not by how productive you were, but by how present you were? Not by how others responded to your actions, but by how fully you experienced them? What if you allowed joy to sneak in through the cracks, in the unplanned, the quiet, the overlooked? Because joy doesn't need a stage. It needs your presence, the smile on a stranger's face, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, the way the wind sounds when you're not rushing, the peace that comes when you stop trying to prove yourself and simply be. That is joy, not loud, not showy, but deep, steady, and quietly transformational. And in the end, that's what the Stoic life offers. Not a grand performance, but a grounded existence, one where joy is not a reward for perfection, but a natural result of presence. You don't have to earn it, you just have to return to where it's been hiding all along, this moment. You've heard it 100 times, be present, but today I hope you felt it. This life you're living, it's not waiting for a more perfect version of you. It's not holding its breath until you become flawless, polished, or completely healed. It's happening right now, and the question is, are you in it? Not performing it, not curating it, but living it. That's what the Stoics were trying to teach us all along, that the pursuit of perfection often leads us further away from peace. That the more we demand flawlessness from ourselves, from others, from the world, the more joy slips through our fingers. Because life was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be present, fully experienced, fully embraced, fully felt. When you slow down enough to notice what's actually here, a quiet shift happens. You start realizing that the peace you've been chasing isn't somewhere far ahead. It's underneath you, beneath the noise, beneath the expectations. It was always there, waiting for you to stop running and finally listen. So don't wait. Don't delay joy until you've checked every box. Don't postpone peace until you've fixed every flaw. Don't let the story of who you should be rob you of the truth of who you already are, right here, right now. This is your life. This is your moment. Be in it. And if this message resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're building a space here, not for perfect people, but for real ones, for thinkers, for seekers, for those who are done performing and ready to be present. Until next time, stay awake, stay grounded, and remember, your power isn't in being flawless, it's in being here. No one likes to be criticized. It stings. It unsettles. It makes you question yourself, your worth, your progress. But what if the very thing you're avoiding, the uncomfortable words, the harsh feedback, the uninvited opinion, is the exact thing you need to grow? What if the sharp edge of criticism wasn't your enemy, but your mirror? We live in a world where people are taught to defend, to explain, to fight back. The moment we're challenged, we armor up. But the Stoic doesn't flinch at feedback. He doesn't seek comfort. He seeks truth. And sometimes, truth doesn't come wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it arrives uninvited, disguised as insult, carried in the voice of someone who doesn't even know you. But still, it teaches. You see, Stoicism isn't about silence or suppression. It's about inner strength, the kind of strength that can hear something painful and say, "Is there something here I need to see?" Not because you lack confidence, but because you've outgrown the need to be constantly validated, because you've chosen growth over ego, evolution over image. So today, we flip the script. We stop running from criticism and we learn how to face it. We ask, what is this trying to show me? Where is the lesson beneath the sting? How can I let this sharpen me instead of shame me? Because when you stop fearing criticism, you unlock a deeper kind of power, one rooted not in being right, but in becoming better. Criticism is a tool, not a threat. Most people hear criticism and immediately go into defense mode. Their heart rate spikes. Their mind starts building a case. They replay every word, dissect every tone, searching for offense, not insight. Why? Because they see criticism as a threat to their identity, their image, their control. But the Stoic sees something very different. He sees an opportunity, a moment to pause, reflect, and refine, because criticism, when approached with wisdom, becomes a tool. And like any tool, it can build or destroy, depending on how you choose to use it. The modern world tells you to protect your confidence at all costs, block out the haters, ignore the doubters. And yes, some criticism is noise, rooted in envy, ignorance, or projection, but not all of it. And the danger of dismissing criticism completely is that you start to live inside an echo chamber, a place where only your voice matters and nothing challenges you to evolve. That's not confidence, that's fragility in disguise. The Stoics didn't avoid hard truths, they sought them out. Marcus Aurelius welcomed correction. Epictetus warned against arrogance. Seneca reminded us that self-deception is the most dangerous kind of ignorance. Why? Because a person who cannot be criticized is a person who cannot grow. A person so addicted to praise that they can't hear the quiet voice of correction is a person who will eventually plateau, not because they lack potential, but because they lack perspective. Think about a sword being forged. It doesn't get its strength from being polished. It gets it from being hammered, over and over, shaped by fire, sharpened by friction. That's what criticism can be. if you're brave enough to face it. If you stop seeing it as a personal attack and start using it as honest data, something to examine, something to test yourself against, something to refine your path. But that shift requires humility. It requires the kind of inner strength that says, I'm still learning. I don't know everything. And even if this message isn't delivered perfectly, there might be something in it I need to hear. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Because when you're no longer afraid of being corrected, you become fearless in your growth. You become open, adaptable, resilient, not because you've stopped caring, but because you care about becoming better more than being right. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean you accept every word of criticism blindly. It means you consider it. You hold it up to the light. You ask yourself, does this reflect something true in me? Is there a pattern I've ignored, a blind spot I've overlooked? You don't let it define you, but you let it inform you, and that makes all the difference. When you treat criticism as a tool, you remove its sting. You reclaim your power, because now you're using it for your own evolution, not allowing it to break you. You're no longer waiting for flawless praise to feel worthy. You're building a foundation so strong, even sharp feedback can't shake it. It only shapes it. So the next time someone criticizes you, pause. Don't react. Ask yourself, is this a threat or a tool I can use? And then decide, not from ego, but from vision. Because the Stoic doesn't fear discomfort. He uses it. He refines himself with it. And that's what makes him unshakable. Learn from what stings. There's something raw about criticism that gets under your skin. Not the polite, carefully worded kind, the other kind. The kind that surprises you, the kind that leaves a mark. Maybe it's a comment on your work, your character, your voice, your pace. Maybe it's not even fully accurate, but it hurts. And that's precisely where the opportunity lies. Because what stings, reveals, it forces you to confront something real, either within yourself or within the expectations you've clung to. The Stoics would urge you not to run from this sting, but to study it, because pain, when faced with courage, becomes insight. Epictetus reminded us, it is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. So when you hear something critical and it strikes a nerve, ask yourself, why does this affect me so deeply? Is it touching on something I've tried to ignore? A part of me I've avoided refining? Or is it exposing a false belief? Perhaps the need to always be praised, the desire to always feel in control. Either way, the emotional response is a signal, a doorway, a chance to dig deeper, not shut down. Because growth doesn't always arrive gently, sometimes it arrives as discomfort, and the question is, do you recoil from that discomfort or do you investigate it? Most people numb themselves to criticism, they brush it off or internalize it as shame. But the Stoic does neither. He reflects. He extracts value from the sting. He asks, what is this trying to teach me about myself? Sometimes what hurts the most is what we most need to hear, not because the delivery was kind, but because it pointed to something we didn't want to see. Maybe you are too reactive. Maybe you have been neglecting something important. Maybe you do need to slow down, to communicate better, to listen more. That's not shame. That's a signal. And if you respond with humility instead of ego, that sting becomes your teacher, not your enemy. But let's also be honest. Not all criticism is valid. Some is rooted in bias, insecurity, or plain cruelty. That's why it's not just about feeling the sting. It's about learning from it. And learning means discerning. It means you take the emotion, slow it down, and sift through it. Is there truth here? Even partial truth? And if there is, what will I do with it? You don't let it define you, but you let it sharpen you. There's something powerful about being able to sit with what stings without collapsing under it, to feel the discomfort but not become bitter, to recognize that pain, when used properly, doesn't just break you down, it builds you up. Like a wound that heals stronger than before, like a weakness that once faced becomes a strength. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, and sometimes the sting is the way, not because it's pleasant, but because it reveals. And once something is revealed, it can be changed, refined, transformed. So when criticism stings, don't run. Don't pretend it didn't affect you, and don't weaponize it against yourself either. Pause, listen, learn, ask, what part of me needed this discomfort? What growth does this moment invite me into? Because the moment you learn from what stings, you stop fearing pain, and you begin to evolve. Filter feedback wisely. Not all criticism deserves your attention, and not every opinion is a mirror worth looking into. In a world where voices are loud, constant, and often careless, it's easy to drown in feedback, some of it helpful, much of it not. The Stoic understands this deeply. He doesn't reject all criticism, nor does he accept it blindly. He filters. Because wisdom isn't just about being open to correction. It's about knowing which correction is worth absorbing and which is just noise disguised as insight. Marcus Aurelius faced constant judgment as emperor from politicians, philosophers, and citizens alike. But you don't see him reacting to every voice. Instead, in meditations, he reminds himself to stay centered, to return to his values, to weigh what others say, not by how loud they speak, but by how closely their words align with reason and virtue. This is what it means to filter feedback. You don't ignore criticism, you test it. Ask yourself, who is this coming from? Do they live by the standards they preach? Do they truly understand me, my intentions, or my craft? Is their feedback specific and actionable, or vague and emotionally charged? The source matters, the clarity matters, the intent matters. You wouldn't take medical advice from someone who's never studied the human body, so why would you take emotional or strategic advice from someone who hasn't built what you're trying to build? But filtering feedback doesn't mean surrounding yourself only with praise. On the contrary, some of the most valuable feedback will come from voices that challenge you. It might come from a mentor who pushes you harder than you'd like, from a colleague who points out something you missed, even from a critic who doesn't intend to help, but whose words strike a chord of truth. The key is not to label feedback as good or bad based on how it feels. It's to measure it based on how it aligns with your path and your principles. This requires emotional maturity. If your first reaction is always to defend yourself, you won't get to the deeper questions. Is this true? Can I learn something here? Even if I disagree, is there a part of this worth exploring further? That's the mindset of a Stoic, open but discerning, not easily swayed by approval, not destroyed by critique. And here's the paradox. When you learn to filter feedback wisely, you become less reactive and more reflective. You stop wasting energy on criticism that was never meant to serve you. You stop letting anonymous opinions shape your identity. And at the same time, you become more open to feedback that truly helps you grow. Because you're not defensive anymore, you're intentional. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." That's especially true with feedback. Most of the pain we feel doesn't come from the criticism itself. It comes from how we internalize it. We let it echo in our minds. We assign it weight it doesn't deserve. But when you filter feedback, you strip away the unnecessary weight. You hold only what's useful. You discard what's not. And in doing so, you remain light, focused, and grounded. So the next time someone criticizes you, pause. Don't absorb it immediately. Don't reject it immediately either. Filter it. Ask yourself, is this constructive? Does it align with my values? Can it help me get closer to who I want to become? If the answer is yes, use it. If not, let it pass. Not every arrow deserves your shield, because filtering isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and wisdom is what transforms feedback into fuel. Don't take it personally, take it purposefully. There's a moment right after someone criticizes you when your mind tightens, your body tenses, you feel exposed, judged, misunderstood. That moment is where most people stop. They defend, they shrink, or they retaliate. Because it feels personal, like an attack, like a statement about your worth. But that's the illusion. The truth is, most criticism is not really about you. It's about perception, about how others interpret your actions, your choices, your words, through their own lens, their own insecurities, their own values. And once you understand that, you stop taking it personally. You start taking it purposefully. To the Stoics, the opinion of others was neither sacred nor worthless. It was simply data, information to be considered, filtered, and if useful, applied. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. In other words, what hurts you is not the words of others, but your interpretation of them. You assign the meaning. You decide whether that feedback defines you or refines you. Taking criticism purposefully means you don't ask, why are they saying this about me? You ask, what can I learn from this? You remove the emotional charge and replace it with curiosity. That's not cold, that's disciplined. You stop using criticism as a mirror for your ego and start using it as a tool for your evolution. You're no longer trying to protect yourself, you're trying to improve yourself. But this requires an identity rooted in something deeper than validation. If your sense of worth comes from approval, then every critique will feel like a wound. But if your identity is rooted in growth, in virtue, in clarity, in purpose, then critique becomes just another instrument, sometimes sharp, sometimes blunt, but always neutral, until you decide what to do with it. This doesn't mean you detach completely from emotion. You're human. It might still sting, but instead of reacting from that pain, you pause, you breathe, you hold the reaction in one hand and your values in the other, and then you choose your response intentionally. When someone criticizes you, especially if they do it harshly or unfairly, remember, that's a reflection of their world, not necessarily yours. Maybe they're projecting, maybe they're stressed, maybe they don't know the full story, but that doesn't matter as much as what you do with it. Taking criticism personally anchors you in resentment. Taking it purposefully frees you to ask better questions. Does this point to a real blind spot? Could I communicate more clearly? Am I operating with integrity, not just in my eyes, but in how others experience me? Those are questions that move you forward. There's something powerful about someone who listens to critique without flinching, not because they don't care, but because they care about the right things. They're not seeking perfection, they're seeking alignment. They want to live in such a way that even their mistakes become part of their mastery. That's what it means to take criticism purposefully, to let it sharpen your self-awareness, to let it guide your refinement, So next time you're criticized, catch yourself. Notice the urge to take it personally. Notice the story forming in your mind, and then interrupt it. Ask instead, what is this moment here to teach me? What purpose can I assign to this discomfort? Because once you stop trying to defend who you are, you can start building who you're becoming. Criticism reveals blind spots. We all have them, blind spots, patterns we can't see because we're too close to them, habits we've normalized, behaviors we've rationalized, flaws we've hidden so well from ourselves that they've become invisible. And the uncomfortable truth? You can't fix what you can't see. That's where criticism becomes essential, not as an attack, but as a flashlight. It shines where your awareness hasn't yet reached. It reveals what your self-perception leaves out. And if you're strong enough to look, without flinching, without running, you can grow in ways you never thought possible. The Stoics understood that the greatest danger isn't being wrong, it's refusing to see where you're wrong. That's why they valued feedback, even when it was harsh. Marcus Aurelius used meditations not to celebrate his strengths, but to wrestle with his flaws, to examine his own thoughts, to uncover what pride, what indulgence, what ego was hiding beneath the surface. He knew that unexamined patterns become prisons, and criticism, when used wisely, helps you break free. But here's the paradox. The more skilled you become, the harder it is to see your own blind spots. Success can blind you. Praise can soften your vigilance. You start to believe you've outgrown certain lessons. And that's when the cracks form. That's when you stop asking hard questions. That's when you become more concerned with looking good than being good. And that's exactly why criticism, even when it's unsolicited or poorly delivered, can be a gift. Because it interrupts your narrative. It makes you pause. It says, look again. Not all criticism will be accurate. Some will be based on projection, misunderstanding, or envy. But that doesn't mean it's useless. Sometimes even false criticism exposes a truth you weren't ready to admit, that you care too much about what people think, that you avoid confrontation, that you downplay your worth, or that you've been coasting when you should have been confronting something deeper. The Stoic approach isn't to agree or disagree on the spot. It's to reflect, to ask, what truth might this be pointing to, even if it's uncomfortable? Blind spots don't go away just because you ignore them. They grow, and eventually they cost you, in relationships, in clarity, in peace. But once they're seen, they can be changed. You can shift your tone, rethink your strategy, apologize where needed, rebuild trust, recommit to your values. But all of that starts with awareness. And awareness starts when you stop shielding yourself from criticism and start using it as a mirror. There's a difference between shame and growth. Shame says, there's something wrong with me. Growth says, there's something I haven't seen yet. Shame closes the door. Growth opens it. Criticism, when filtered through a Stoic lens, doesn't tell you that you're broken. It tells you that you're human, and that you have more potential than you've realized. And here's what's truly powerful. Once you start uncovering your blind spots, you become harder to manipulate. You're not thrown off when someone points out your flaws because you've already done that work yourself. You're not obsessed with appearing flawless because you're committed to being honest. You've trained yourself to examine your inner world, not just perform for the outer one. That's real strength. That's inner sovereignty. So ask yourself, where might I be missing something? What am I pretending not to know? What patterns keep repeating, not because I'm unlucky, but because I'm blind to them? These are not easy questions, but they're essential. And criticism, even when uncomfortable, can lead you there. Don't fear what it reveals, use it, because once you see clearly, you're no longer controlled by the unconscious. You're free. Use it to refine, not retreat. When most people are criticized, they retreat, they pull back, they shrink their efforts. They start second-guessing every move, every word, every decision. That's the danger of letting criticism go unchecked. It can erode your confidence, blur your clarity, and turn your forward motion into hesitation. But the Stoic does something different. He doesn't retreat. He refines. Because for the Stoic, criticism isn't a stop sign. It's a sharpening stone. To refine means to evolve without abandoning the mission. It means you take the heat and use it to forge something stronger, not to extinguish the flame altogether. The Stoic doesn't interpret criticism as a declaration of failure. He sees it as feedback on form. Maybe your strategy needs adjusting. Maybe your delivery needs softening. Maybe your assumptions need checking. But none of that means you're not on the right path. It just means the path needs clearing. Seneca once wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." Criticism, when internalized correctly, is a kind of difficulty, mental resistance that, if handled with wisdom, builds emotional muscle. But only if you stay in the ring. Only if you face it, dissect it, and ask, what can I do with this? Not, what does this say about me? But what does this suggest about my method, my message, my moment? Refinement is powerful because it keeps your mission intact while upgrading your approach. It's the difference between overreacting and recalibrating. You don't abandon your voice just because someone misunderstood it. You don't kill your momentum just because someone criticized your style. Instead, you step back and assess, is there a better way to say this? A smarter way to execute this? A clearer way to stand in this truth? That's refinement. And it's a discipline, one that requires humility without self-erasure. But why do so many people retreat instead of refine? Because ego hates friction, and criticism, no matter how constructive, introduces friction. It's easier to retreat and justify it with phrases like, "they don't get me," or "this just isn't for me." But that's not Stoicism. That's self-protection dressed as wisdom. The Stoic doesn't run from the mirror. He stares into it. He sees the uncomfortable details, and then he adjusts, not to appease others, but to honor his own growth. When you use criticism to refine, you gain something precious: agility. You're not rigid in your ways. You're not fragile in your identity. You become adaptable without being spineless, grounded without being stubborn. And that balance between holding your core and shifting your tactics is where mastery lives. Imagine a craftsman refining his work. He doesn't throw the entire sculpture away because one edge is rough. He smooths the edge. He shapes the line. He brings more precision to the vision he already believes in. That's your work, too. Criticism doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're still shaping, still improving, still alive to the possibility of being better. So the next time critique comes, don't recoil, don't disappear, don't water yourself down just to avoid discomfort. Step back, breathe, and ask, how can this refine me? Not to make others more comfortable, but to make you more clear, more accurate, more aligned with who you're trying to become. Refinement is not a reaction to rejection. It's a response to growth. The Stoic chooses that response every time, and that's why he keeps evolving long after others have retreated. Reflect before you reject. It's easy to dismiss criticism the moment it hits, to roll your eyes, to shut down. to mentally file the person under "they just don't understand me." That's the knee-jerk reaction, fast, defensive, self-protective. But fast reactions often come from fragile places, and the Stoic doesn't aim to protect his ego, he aims to protect his growth. That's why he pauses, why he waits, why he reflects before he rejects. Because some of the most transformative truths you'll ever hear won't feel like compliments. They'll come wrapped in discomfort, delivered awkwardly, maybe even from people who don't like you. And if you're not careful, if you reject too quickly, you might miss a truth that could have changed everything. Marcus Aurelius, in the quiet of his own reflection, reminded himself, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after." That sentence contains immense power, not just because of its humility, but because of its orientation. He wasn't looking for validation. He was looking for truth. And truth doesn't always arrive gently. Reflection doesn't mean you agree. It means you create space between what was said and what you decide it means. You sit with the discomfort long enough to ask, why did this strike me? What emotion did it trigger? What part of me feels exposed? These aren't questions for the sake of wallowing. They're diagnostic tools. They help you investigate the real reason something upset you. And often that reason has less to do with the critic and more to do with your own internal terrain. Sometimes reflection confirms that the criticism was misinformed, and that's a useful insight too. It teaches you about the gap between intention and perception. It shows you where your message may be misunderstood or where your actions may be misread. That doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means there's room for clarification, for greater alignment between what you mean and how it lands. Other times, reflection reveals something harder, that the critic struck a nerve because they touched a truth. Maybe you have been inconsistent. Maybe your tone was off. Maybe you're not showing up as powerfully as you believe you are. These moments hurt, but they're sacred, because they offer you something rare, the chance to change before life forces you to. That's not criticism to reject. That's a warning to respect. And even when the criticism is harsh or clumsy, the discipline of reflection helps you extract the lesson without taking in the poison. You can separate the delivery from the data. You can say, their tone was off, but the point, that's worth exploring. That's maturity. That's how the Stoic remains open without being impressionable. So the next time someone criticizes you, especially if your first instinct is to reject it, don't react. Reflect. Give yourself a moment, a breath, a question. Is there something here I need to hear, even if I don't like how it was said? Because once you train yourself to reflect before you reject, you stop being reactive and you become intentional. And that's how you take control of your evolution, not by silencing every critic, but by listening with discernment and choosing your growth over your pride. Respond with curiosity, not ego. When someone critiques you, your work, your words, your way of being, your ego wants to speak first. It rushes in, armor on, ready to defend, deflect, justify, and that's the reflex most people give into. But the Stoic, he does something far rarer. He responds with curiosity, not because he doubts his worth, but because he's more interested in truth than in protecting a version of himself. He's more committed to growth than to being right. Curiosity is a mindset. It doesn't assume. It explores. It replaces, "How dare they say that?" with, "Why might they see it that way?" It asks, "What are they reacting to? What context am I missing? What part of my behavior, tone, or delivery could have contributed to this?" These aren't questions of guilt, they're questions of clarity. Because curiosity doesn't take criticism as a verdict, it takes it as a clue. Ego says, "They're wrong, they don't get me, this is unfair." Curiosity says, "What might I be missing? Is there a perspective here I haven't considered?" And this isn't about being passive or letting others walk all over you. On the contrary, it's about being so grounded in your values that you don't have to flinch at discomfort. Curiosity is a kind of quiet power. It disarms tension. It invites deeper insight. It builds bridges instead of burning them. Because when you respond with curiosity, even the person criticizing you feels it. They sense the openness. And that often changes the tone of the entire interaction. This approach also protects your peace. Because when you're curious, you're not wasting energy on reactivity. You're not mentally writing a comeback. You're not obsessing over how to prove yourself. You're observing, gathering, asking better questions. You're staying in control of your inner world, even if the outer one feels chaotic. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If someone is mistaken, instruct them kindly. If that's not possible, at least correct them without rancor." Embedded in that wisdom is curiosity, a refusal to let ego dictate the conversation, a willingness to stay composed, even when challenged. And sometimes, curiosity will lead you to surprising places. You might discover that the criticism wasn't about you at all. It was about the other person's pain, insecurity, or misunderstanding. Or you might find that there's something valuable in their words. Not easy to hear, but necessary. Either way, curiosity gives you choices. And choice is where your power lives. This mindset also creates a culture around you. When you respond with curiosity instead of ego, people feel safer being honest with you. They know you won't blow up, shut down, or retaliate. That makes you better, as a leader, as a creator, as a human being. Because people grow around those who can take feedback without breaking. So the next time someone criticizes you, try this. Don't defend. Ask. Ask what they mean. Ask what led them to feel that way. Ask what they would have done differently. And then listen, not to win, not to respond, but to understand. Because ego reacts, but curiosity refines, and the Stoic chooses refinement every time. Seek growth in discomfort. Most people avoid discomfort like a disease. They sidestep it, numb it, distract themselves from it, especially the discomfort that comes from being criticized. That tightness in the chest, that sinking in the stomach, that urge to disappear, or explain, or lash out. But for the Stoic, discomfort is not something to run from. It's something to walk into. Because embedded in discomfort is the exact force that sharpens you. Growth doesn't happen in ease. It happens in friction. And if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not evolving. The Stoics saw discomfort not as a punishment, but as a path. When Epictetus lost his freedom and became a slave, he didn't fold. He used the experience to deepen his philosophy. When Marcus Aurelius led Rome through war and plague, he didn't seek comfort. He sought clarity, because they both understood what modern minds forget, that discomfort is a signal that you've stepped outside the safe zone. And that's where transformation lives. Criticism by nature is uncomfortable. It exposes your blind spots. It confronts your self-image. It forces you to pause and ask, am I really as aligned as I think I am? And that moment, if embraced, can change everything. Not because the criticism was pleasant, but because it pushed you to reflect, to adjust, to rise. Growth doesn't happen when you're admired. It happens when you're challenged. It doesn't happen in applause. It happens in the silence that follows the sting. And the reason so many people stay stuck is because they interpret discomfort as a red flag rather than a green light. They think, if this hurts, I must be doing something wrong. But the Stoic flips that idea. If this challenges me, maybe I'm about to learn something I never would have seen on my own. When you stop fearing discomfort, you open up space for rapid evolution, because now you're not avoiding hard conversations. You're initiating them. You're not dodging feedback. You're asking for it. Not because you enjoy pain, but because you know it's the fastest route to clarity, to depth, to mastery. Discomfort becomes your teacher, not your enemy. But this shift in mindset doesn't happen by accident. It requires practice. It requires sitting with the tightness, naming it, asking where it's coming from, and most importantly, not fleeing from it. You can't grow past what you won't face, and discomfort is often the signal that you're right at the edge of that growth. This applies to every part of life, your relationships, your work, your inner world. Maybe the criticism comes from someone you love, and it's painful because it's true. Maybe it comes from a stranger, and it triggers something deeper, an insecurity you haven't dealt with. Either way, the feeling is your compass. It points not to what's wrong with you, but to what's ready to evolve. Seneca wrote, "We must suffer into truth." That's the essence of growth in discomfort. The understanding that suffering is not always a sign of misalignment. It's sometimes the gateway to becoming more whole, more wise, more yourself. But only if you stay with it. Only if you don't numb it with defensiveness or drown it with distractions. So the next time criticism makes you uncomfortable, pause. Don't run. Don't soothe it with excuses. Don't protect yourself with pride. Ask instead, what part of me is being invited to grow right now? What truth is discomfort trying to teach me? Because the Stoic doesn't seek comfort, he seeks character, and character is built, not in ease, but in the honest, difficult moments most people avoid. Let it sharpen, not shame. There's a fine line between using criticism as a tool for growth and using it as a weapon against yourself. Many people, without realizing it, turn feedback into a form of self-punishment. They take one comment and spiral. They obsess over every word, overanalyze every flaw, and slowly let the critique morph into shame. But that's not strength, that's self-destruction. And it's the opposite of what the Stoic teaches. Because the Stoic doesn't let criticism diminish him, he lets it sharpen him. He becomes clearer, stronger, and more focused, not less. To sharpen is to refine without resentment. It's to take in what's useful without drowning in guilt or self-doubt. The Stoic doesn't crumble at feedback. He listens, filters, learns, and keeps moving. That's what separates growth from shame. Shame says, you're not enough. Growth says, there's more to learn. Shame keeps you frozen. Growth keeps you flexible. Marcus Aurelius never wrote in his journals about how unworthy he was. He didn't spiral into self-hate. Even when he pointed out his own shortcomings, it was with a tone of awareness, not attack. He didn't use philosophy to beat himself up. He used it to rise, to correct, to walk straighter, because he knew being flawed is part of being human. What matters is how you respond to those flaws when they're revealed. So if someone critiques you and it hits hard, don't let that pain define you. Let it direct you. Ask, what edge can this sharpen? What behavior can this refine? What awareness is being offered here, even if it's uncomfortable? The Stoic sees everything, even criticism, as training. And training is hard. But it doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're preparing. You sharpen a blade by applying pressure, but too much pressure, applied the wrong way, damages it. That's what shame does. It pushes past growth and into destruction. It turns a moment of learning into a story of inadequacy. Don't fall for that story. You are not broken because you were corrected. You are not small because someone didn't approve. You are not failing because someone saw your weakness. You are becoming, and becoming is messy. Let criticism sharpen your communication, your discipline, your ability to lead. Let it sculpt your tone, your timing, your presence. Let it point you toward more intentional action. But do not let it turn into shame, because shame will keep you stuck in self-doubt, chasing perfection, afraid to try again. And that's not Stoicism, that's imprisonment. Seneca wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom is earned." And part of that earning comes through feedback, through the friction of being told you were wrong or that you could do better. Let those moments fuel you, not flatten you. So here's the practice. Next time you're criticized and that voice of shame starts to creep in, pause, breathe, and say to yourself, this isn't proof that I'm not enough. It's an invitation to become more. Then sharpen. One adjustment, one insight, 1 degree better. You don't need to carry the weight of shame to rise. You just need the courage to keep refining who you are. You're going to be criticized, no matter how careful, how kind, how clear you try to be. People will misunderstand you. Some will judge without knowing you. Others will offer feedback that cuts deeper than expected. But the Stoic doesn't build a life that avoids criticism. He builds a mind that uses it, that filters it, that takes what serves and discards what doesn't, without losing his balance in the process. Because the goal isn't to live untouched, it's to live unshaken. Criticism doesn't have to be the thing that breaks your spirit. It can be the thing that builds your character, if you let it sharpen you, without letting it shame you. If you let it open your eyes, without closing your heart. That's where the power is, not in being flawless, but in being courageous enough to face what's difficult, to stay open in the fire, to evolve without losing yourself. Let others flinch at discomfort. Let others drown in validation. You stand still when it stings. Listen with depth. Reflect without collapsing. Ask better questions. Grow where it hurts. And keep moving forward with more clarity, more grace, and more strength than before. Because the Stoic doesn't ask, "Will I be criticized?" He asks, "How will I respond when I am?" And that response, that inner discipline, that refusal to shrink, that ability to turn resistance into refinement, is what sets you apart. If this episode gave you something to think about, something to challenge, or something to build on, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's walking their own path of growth. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this space isn't about performing perfection. It's about practicing presence, wisdom, self-mastery. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and remember, criticism is not the end of your path. It's a tool. Use it well.